The procedure perfected in England doesn't involve a test tube at all, rather a glass petri dish. It's in a dish like this one that doctors want to combine a woman's egg with her husband's sperm, let them fertilize, and then reimplant the embryo into the woman's uterus. Dr. Howard Jones heads up a team of 5 medical school doctors who want to perform the procedure in Norfolk.
Fertilization normally occurs in the fallopian tube, and it takes about 36 hours for the egg after ovulation to make this transit down into the body of the uterus. Individuals who have disease of the fallopian tube or who have had them removed for whatever cause, of course, cannot accomplish this. Therefore, we hope to get the egg from here to fertilize it as we have described and to replace it into the body of the uterus by a very small instrument which will go up the vagina and through the cervix into the body of the uterus.
If the State Health Commissioner approves plans for the clinic, the procedure will take place in this delivery room at Norfolk General Hospital. The egg will be retrieved from the woman with a long hypodermic-type needle and then incubated for 3 or 4 days in a room next door. Dr. Jones says that part of the procedure is fairly simple. It's the timing that's tough.
It's extremely critical to retrieve the egg as close to the normal ovulatory time as possible. Ovulation being the time when the egg is extruded from the ovary. This has been shown to be necessary by our British colleagues who found that unless this was done with great accuracy, the chances of success were diminished.
Since plans for the clinic were announced last winter, the doctors have received more than 2,000 letters and thousands of phone calls, all from women interested in the project. 10 married couples from around the country and Puerto Rico have been accepted in the clinic. Monday night, we'll talk with one of them, Brian and Linda Grimes. Joan Gartland, Area 10 Eyewitness News.
How deep-seated it is toward...
1 out of 7 American married couples of childbearing age has trouble having children. The reasons for infertility vary, but for about 1/5 of the women who can't bear children, the reason is blocked or diseased fallopian tubes. Linda Grimes of Providence, Rhode Island is one of those women. The 33-year-old graphic designer has lost both fallopian tubes, one just last spring.
I had an ectopic pregnancy, for which they did an emergency operation not more than 6 hours after I entered the hospital. So I nearly lost my life.
Linda and her husband Brian told reporter Joel Rubin they were devastated at the thought of not being able to have the family they planned when they were married. But they said they received new hope 2 weeks ago when they were selected as candidates for test tube or in vitro fertilization at the Eastern Virginia Medical School.
Well, as Brian will attest, I was a wreck. And weepy and constantly crying. In fact, don't be surprised. It just changes your whole attitude when you know there's some hope available for having your own. I don't know why it's so special to have your own, but as many people out there know, it is a very personal, special event, and it just made me my hope spring anew, or whatever.
Linda and Brian, both of whom are Catholic, also say they're worried that opposition to in vitro fertilization from their own church and from Right to Life groups could close the Norfolk Clinic and dash their last hope for having children.
This is totally a pro-life concept. There's been no mention of abortion or reduction of eggs or anything like that. It's totally misconstrued. It's completely pro-life. I've just been incredibly impressed by that since we've been here.
They're not Orwellian figures. They're trained doctors, human beings who want to help other human beings who don't have the chances that others do.
Not everyone agrees with Brian and Linda Grimes. In fact, opposition to the in vitro fertilization clinic has increased dramatically in recent months. Tomorrow night we'll talk with one of the opponents and hear what he says are serious moral and medical questions about conception of a human life outside a woman's body. Joan Gartland, Area 10 Eyewitness News, Norfolk. Most of the questions about in vitro fertilization are discussed in this report issued last spring by an Ethics Advisory Board of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. After hearing from scores of witnesses and conducting an exhaustive study, the board found that in vitro fertilization is ethically defensible, but still legitimately controverted. Basically, an approval with reservations. Charles Dean is president of the Tidewater chapter of the Virginia Society for Human Life, an anti-abortion organization. The group, along with the Catholic Church, opposes in vitro fertilization for many of the same reasons they oppose abortion.
Basically, the manipulation and destruction of human beings, tiny human beings at their earliest stage has to be unacceptable to any civilized society.
Dean claims that fertilized eggs have and will be destroyed by doctors in the clinic, and that imperfect embryos or fetuses will be aborted. Dr. Howard Jones, who heads up the in vitro clinic, says that doctors plan to reimplant all fertilized eggs, not destroy them, and that the activities of the clinic will be monitored by a medical board. But fertilization, whether natural or in vitro, isn't perfect, he says, and in those cases, abortion will be offered as an alternative.
It seems to me that it would be unwise and indeed even malpractice not to offer these women the same opportunity that patients who are normally pregnant have.
Dr. Jones says there's no reason to believe the in vitro process will create a higher percentage of abnormal embryos. But Dean disputes this, saying the medical school clinic is experimenting with human beings rather than animals, with a very limited chance of success.
The issue of conceiving a human life outside a woman's body won't be decided here. Norfolk General Hospital's application to make renovations for the clinic must still be reviewed before a state health board and the state health commissioner. After that, the issue could be fought out in court. If the clinic should fail in all these steps, doctors say they won't give up their efforts for in vitro fertilization. They say they'll just try someplace else. Joan Gartland, Area 10 Eyewitness News, Norfolk.
Doctors, hospital officials, medical students, patients, religious leaders, anti-abortionists, and concerned citizens packed the health department auditorium in a hallway outside. The hearing began with a biology lesson from Dr. Howard Jones on how in vitro fertilization works. But opponents questioned how often it works and what happens when it doesn't.
If there are, as Dr. Jones avers, quotes, no substantial risks in the program in England, why then did Dr. Steptoe have an agreement with Mrs. Brown to terminate her pregnancy if it was found to be abnormal by amniocentesis and ultrasound?
The ramifications of in vitro research are almost incomprehensible. To illustrate, in vitro research will not necessarily unite a wife's ovum with her husband's sperm. There is always the grave possibility of in vitro incest.
The emotional crowd booed some speakers and applauded others. Dr. John Biggers from Harvard, who had come a long way to testify in support of the clinic, denied claims the in vitro process would increase the number of abnormal babies.
Even if there was a small extra risk, this in no way approaches the risk taken by couples proceeding to have a child by natural means, knowing full well that they carry adverse genes. Few people object to that reproductive decision.
Also supporting the clinic was Kathy Wheaton, a patient in the in vitro program. She spoke of the emotional pain of thinking she couldn't have a child and the hope she now had that she might be able to through the in vitro process.
I have no fear that my child will be a freak, nor that I'm tampering with God's work in achieving pregnancy in this manner. I am simply engaging in a procedure that takes the place of a part of my reproductive system that no longer works.
State Health Commissioner Dr. James Kenley turned down Norfolk General's original application because he thought the clinic needed more public scrutiny like it got at today's public hearing. The application will now be reviewed again by a local health board, the state health board, and then back to Dr. Kenley for a final decision. Joan Gartland, Area 10 Eyewitness News, Norfolk.